And there's kind of a new normal that rolls on, and it's completely ambiguous. We still have the plague that's sweeping the globe. We have political turmoil. There's extreme economic uncertainty. Massive job losses now continue. Climate catastrophes, racial and civil instability, just to name a few, if that's not enough. I mean, almost everyone has been profoundly affected, except maybe the very wealthy. And psychologists now are looking into, and they're seeing, and researchers are seeing the increase in anxiety, depression, insomnia, and all sorts of health issues, both mental and physiological. As we move, towards the winter and to flu season, we will see, So here we are. And really, for a number of you, this may be the most challenging time of your life. And I know many of you, I've gotten to know many of you, and what brightens my heart is the level of wisdom and strength of compassion that I know you embody. You are up to this challenge, whatever it is, this undetermined challenge. And our little IMCC, I feel, is an extraordinary group of people, and I'm honored to be part of it. So, in support of one another, we shoulder on, and we bring forward the best that we are able. We bring forward our better angels and work with the situation as it unfolds. And so tonight, and I've been thinking about this a lot, how do I want to teach during these times? I want to stay with the nitty-gritty, kind of where the rubber meets the road. I want to share a way of practice that's been useful for me over the years, especially during difficult times, but not just difficult times, but it's a wonderful practice in more pleasant conditions also. Kind of entraining the nervous system into accepting, appreciating, enhancing joy, enhancing peace, enhancing love, supporting the arising of wisdom. And as those of you who've been practicing for a while, you know that a contemplative practice requires a copious amount of courage. It's just the way it is. And all the various systems of spiritual practice that I've come to value encourage you to first be with what is. It's the let's get real part of practice. The be with what is part of the practice. And there's a Japanese poet, I love her little piece. She lived in the 11th century. Izumi was her name. And she said, "A moon at dawn, solitary, meets sky. I knew myself completely, no part left out. A moon at dawn, solitary, meets sky. I knew myself completely, no part left out." I mean, really, that little poem captures the essence of your meditation practice. To know yourselves completely, no part left out. It's a feeling and an intention that whatever it is that arises, boy, and we're in the middle of a big whatever. And, there is a whole range of experiences that we've experienced over the course of our life, some new ones now. It's the intention that whatever it is that arises, let me look at it. Let me see, let me understand. Let me learn to accept it and experience it without resistance. Let me receive it with kindness. And may whatever arises, may it serve to awaken. Now, being with this noble intention for spiritual work might at first seem pretty simple. I mean, we all want to be with what is. But as you might have noticed, it isn't so simple. Even though you hold that sincere intention, to be with what is, let's face it, sometimes you just don't want to. The emotional distress or the physical pain or both, it's too much to face, at least temporarily. You might be off in some way or another. So instead of the full powered intention, the 100%, or as athletes say, I gave it 110%, which always confuses me. Instead of the full powered intention to be with what is in a courageous, fully compassionate way, maybe you sum it up 75% or 50% or 25%, of wanting to be with whatever the current weather system is. And even though that that a contemplative practice works, or how a contemplative practice works, there are times you just can't face things. And for those that are long-term practitioners, there may be even a little self-judgment that arises in the sense of, oh, gee, I know what's called for now, but I just don't have the juice for it. And so, we offer ourselves a little self-forgiveness. We're all human. And although the intention to be with is still solidly internalized as a practitioner, sometimes the energy system is temporarily on what feels like a brownout. So there's always forgiveness, self-forgiveness. Forgiveness begins at home. Can we forgive ourselves? And kindness, self-compassion. And as we try to stress in our teaching here that nothing can be forced in terms of meditation. It's not about pushing for something or pushing against something or grasping for something. And also, on the other hand, too much slack or slovenly indulgence isn't the answer either. The middle way, the Buddha often talked about meditation as similar to tuning a lute, that kind of ancient stringed instrument. They need to be appropriately tuned. And he'd say it's not about, if they're too tight, they're going to break. And if they're too loose, nothing much happens. So it's the same with practice. The energy level needs to be enough to stay calmly with experience, just that much. Too much efforting defeats the natural, easy process of opening. So it's a lifetime of subtle adjustment. Practice is a nuanced, beautiful dance that you choreograph for yourself. And as you've heard me say before, I like to say that you all are contemplative artists. You're carefully and tenderly painting your canvas. No two are exactly the same. Now, before I lead you in a reflection I want to do tonight, I want to emphasize one caveat that runs in the vein of the artistry of practice, and it concerns self-care, self-compassion. If, when you are practicing and you are visited by something extremely difficult, emotionally or physically, you, the contemplative artist, are the moderator of how and when you work with it. Now, eventually, during the course of your practice, you will learn to turn toward and be with everything that arises, everything, no exceptions. But in practicing, if there are challenging and mental and physical states, if you feel in your judgment that you're getting triggered in some way or heading to overwhelm into some flavor of terror, it's prudent to pull back. There's nothing to be gained by white knuckling in your spiritual practice. There's that quasi-mathematical formula. Actually, it's really not a mathematical formula. But suffering equal pain times resistance. Very simple. If we're practicing and say we have a physical pain in the body, we want to practice staying with it. We're in our little laboratory, learning to be with pains, both physical and emotional. And maybe we're just feeling it and we're noticing, oh, it's tingling and it feels a little bit like broken glass, or there's vibrations, etc. And there's no resistance. So maybe pain is on a level of 4 or 5 on a scale of 1 to 10, but we have no resistance. So 0 times 5 is 0 suffering. We're just with it. It's just an experience, you know? But then the pain maybe moves up to 6 or 7, and all of a sudden there's a little bit of resistance. We're kind of pushing back against it. And our resistance is up to a 2. Then say that the pain is up to a 7. Then our suffering is up to a 14. And then if the pain shoots up, usually, if the pain shoots up, it's because resistance has shot up. And so that, if we have a resistance of 10 and a pain of 7, then we've got 70 units of suffering. Very loose mathematical. So it's all done very gently. We keep an eye on the level of resistance. And as an artist, you're modifying your canvas as you go. It might be important to back away. You might explore titrating your experience. And that's very simple. You can, if you notice that things are seeming like they might become overwhelming, you just back out of your practice. You then place your attention on something that's neutral or pleasant. It could be your hands, the tip of your nose, the bottom of your feet. If your body is starting to get agitated, you look for something in your, within your sight, and you put your attention on that, something that's neutral. It could be something in nature or a picture or whatever. So we can titrate. And then when the body settles back down, we can again turn directly toward our experience. And if we feel that it's maybe too much, we back out. So we're always in control in that sense. To kind of lay that out. And I want to begin a reflection now. And so in this reflection may point you to a taste of what is possible in practice. It's a reflection derived from the offerings of Spira, a non-dual teacher who I've come to appreciate. So sit comfortably, close your eyes, take a few deep breaths. And again, experience the aliveness of the body. There's breathing happening, a number of other sensations, vibrations. Now, everyone who's practiced notices how the mind moves off the current experience pretty readily. And oftentimes it has something to do with survival. Planning is an example of survival energy. Plan, and more planning. Lining everything up so you'll be okay. Or there might be a wanting of something, a thing, a person, some more resources that you feel you don't have enough of. Sometimes the mind goes off in an opposite direction, not wanting something you have. Maybe it's a job or a relationship you don't like, or an illness that you have, or an injury. And sometimes the mind will create a bundle of energy, a bundle of anxiety. It worries, it becomes restless. And sometimes the mind just wants to dull out and avoid the current experience. And sometimes it actively moves into distractions to avoid the current experience, to avoid whatever the uncomfortable emotions and sensations might be. So tonight I invite you to bring to mind something that's challenging for you currently, something ideally a little uncomfortable. Maybe you don't pick the most uncomfortable thing in your life, the most uncomfortable challenge, but pick something that has some import. Take some time to conjure that up. And as you bring comfortable up, bring your attention in close. If it's physical distress or some sort of emotional activity, bring your attention there. And the first thing is a simple recognition, maybe naming what is happening. What are the emotions associated with this? Can you identify them? Is there fear, grief, desire? What? What might be active in the body? Go close. Not trying to change anything. If you find that your mind is straying from this task, from just staying with what is, ask yourself the question, where is my mind going and why? Just pose the question, not really trying to answer it, but where is my mind going and why? In almost all cases, the mind is only seeking to leave the current experience because it finds something about the current experience intolerable. And therefore, it just wants to bring that uncomfortable feeling to an end, one way or another. But it may not even know exactly what it is seeking. The mind will just be roaming in the past or the future for something that will alleviate whatever it is that seems to be intolerable or unpleasant about the current situation. So see if you can become in touch with that impulse, if you can, at the level of feeling sensation, the uncomfortableness of the emotion or sensation, which is the driving impulse for the mind, wanting to avoid the emotion or sensation. You know, for most of you, the sound of a babbling brook is not uncomfortable or intolerable. And it won't trigger an escape from the experience. It doesn't compel you to seek something that's not there. It's not present. So in this reflection, we're not disciplining the mind. We're just getting in touch with the feeling impulse behind or underneath much of the activity. In order to escape the discomfort of these feelings, the mind generates thoughts that wander off from the current experience, looking for any object that will bring the discomfort of the feeling to an end. And even if the mind doesn't find a suitable object, just the activity of seeking is enough to mask the discomfort of the feeling. So when the mind asks itself the question, what are you seeking and why? When it meets up with its own activation of seeking, with that question, an honest mind, it will respond, I'm seeking to avoid the discomfort of painful feelings or sensations. That's basically it. I'm looking for an object, a substance, a state of mind, or a relationship, which is going to bring this discomfort to an end. So gently, lovingly, confront the mind with the clear understanding that the activity of seeking or the acquisition of some object does not bring the discomfort of the feeling to an end. It simply masks it. Because as soon as the acquired object or substance or state of mind or relationship comes to an end or disappears in some fashion, the uncomfortable feeling simply resurfaces. Sadly, most people's lives are dominated by the sole desire to avoid the discomfort of unbearable feelings. All this gets set up pretty early, the conditioning. This pattern of feeling, avoiding, seeking, briefly acquiring, feeling again, avoiding, seeking, acquiring, round and round. It's a pattern that dominates most people's lives. It's a cycle of addiction, punctuated by moments of temporary release. So be in touch with whatever in your experience now seems to be unpleasant or intolerable, either a feeling or a sensation. If it's a feeling or emotion, if it's a sensation, maybe it's some physical discomfort, pain. But instead of avoiding that feeling or sensation, do the opposite. Go towards it, or invite it to come nearer to you, closer to you. And in this reflection, I'm really not talking about an image or a memory of a situation in your life that is difficult. I'm talking about your current experience now of an emotion or a sensation that is unpleasant right now. What are you feeling now? Gently turn towards it. Begin to draw it close. By gradually drawing the feeling or sensation closer, you are walking into the fire of the feeling. And as the distance between you and the feeling reduces, as the feeling comes closer and closer, repeatedly ask yourself the question, can I live with this current feeling forever? That question will expose any part of your current experience that is intolerable or unpleasant. Go to that part of the current experience and draw it closer. Do you remember the story of the princess who had to kiss the frog before it turned into the handsome prince? She had to first kiss that which was the most repulsive to her. She had to go close to that which she deeply feared. Now, bring the feeling so close that you can no longer stand back from it and give it a name, let alone understand how it got there. It is just a nameless intensity of feeling. In other words, kiss the frog. Take the unbearable feeling in your hands, caress it. Ask yourself the question, is this emotion or sensation the emotion maybe that I used to label fear, sorrow, grief, loneliness, shame, guilt? Or if it's a sensation that I used to label pain, is it unbearable? Is it even unpleasant? Checking in. Staying as close as you can. Relaxing into fully. If there is a trace of unpleasantness to it, it means you have not yet brought it completely close. Go to that part of the feeling that seems to be unpleasant and bring it closer. Merge with it more intimately. Relax into it. Fall into it. Ask yourself the question, if I were to name this feeling, what would I give it? What name would I give it? It is only possible to give something a name if it stands at a distance from us. You can only name an object when you stand as a separate subject. And if you can, give your current feeling a name. It means you have not yet brought it fully close. If it still feels like sorrow, it means you are standing apart from it as a separate self. Bring the feeling closer, the best that you are able. Let go into it. Release the struggle. You know, it's true that the human eye cannot see itself because there's no distance between itself and itself. Therefore, it cannot see itself as an I. The only reason you can name your feelings as fear, sorrow, shame, loneliness, etc., is because you're standing apart from them as a separate self. Come closer. It's not the feeling that's intolerable. It's the distance between yourself and the feeling that is intolerable. The separate self is that distance. The separate self tries to increase the distance between itself and uncomfortable feelings by moving away from them towards objects, any object. But for contemplative artists, the real resolution of feelings is to do the opposite, to close the distance, close the separation, to bring the feeling closer and closer and closer until, like the eye that cannot see itself, you can no longer name this feeling. You become so merged that you have no idea that it is fear, sorrow, or grief, or loneliness. It is just an unnameable, neutral intensity. You will notice that as you release and relax more deeply into the emotion or the sensation, that you may experience a moment of complete merging, just being, just a vast dimensionless presence. And the next moment you may pop out, so to speak, back into the separate self, subject, object. And then you might relax again and dissolve in and out, It's the dance of the relative and the absolute. Keep asking yourself the question from time to time, is there anything unpleasant about my current experience? See that the unpleasantness is not in the experience itself, it is in your resistance to it. Suffering equals pain times resistance. That resistance is actually the separate self. The distance between a perceived self and experience. And that distance creates that subject-object relationship. So if there's just a tinge of unpleasantness left in your current experience, bring that unpleasantness under clear inspection. Bring it closer. Don't just think it, feel it, release into it. Caress it, kiss it, open yourself fully to it until you can say with complete honesty, I can live with you forever. Be sensitive to the slightest impulse to avoid your current experience, to leave the now. For many of us, for a long time, conditioning has told us that happiness is to be found by avoiding uncomfortable feelings through acquiring things, substances, so forth. But this practice is the very opposite. That happiness or peace or love that you have been looking for is concealed at the very heart of experience, any experience. It's your rejection of uncomfortable feelings that makes the happiness that lies at the heart seem to be missing. It's not missing. Is there any distance between myself and my experience? That distance is the separate self. That distance is your suffering. It is only possible to know what experience is when it's looked at from the outside by an observer. From the inside, it's not possible to know what anything is. The experience of love is the collapse of the imaginary distance between yourself and your experience. We all know this in relationship. The experience of love is the experience of the absence of distance between yourself and another. Happiness is not a pleasant feeling. It is the absence of distance between yourself and your feelings. And why do unpleasant sensations make you unhappy and pleasant sensations make you happy? The only reason is that within unpleasant sensations, you're motivated to move away from it. Whereas with pleasant sensation, you are attracted towards it. Another way of saying it is that in a pleasant sensation, there's a merging of yourself with the sensation. There is a dissolution between self and the sensation. It's not the sensation that causes happiness. It's the absence of distance between yourself and the sensation. It is bridging separation. It's that dissolution of the separate self that gives rise to happiness, not the acquisition of the sensation. The French word for orgasm is la petite mort, a little death. It's not the sensation that brings happiness. It's that in the moment the distance between yourself and the object collapses. There's a little death of the separate self. And when the separate self disappears, the stuff out of which the sensation is made, happiness itself, shines. It's not the sensation that delivers the happiness. It's the absence of the self that reveals that the ever-present underlying happiness that's there. It's the substance of all feelings, really. Some objects have the power to draw you closer to them, maybe a walk in nature or a particular type of music or art forms. But other perceptions you resist, and therefore they make you unhappy. You might call them ugly. The beauty is not in the object. The experience of beauty is the absence of distance between yourself and the object. The experience of ugliness is not in the object. It is the distance between yourself and the object caused by your rejection. The separate self is always on a search for beauty, happiness, or love. But it can't find what it's seeking because its own activity veils what it's searching for. And the separate self is not an entity. It's just an activity of seeking, looking. So come back to your feelings for these last moments of the reflection. Back to your sensations, perceptions. Is there the slightest impulse in you to move away from the current feeling or perception? And in those moments, see what happens to thinking when there's not the slightest impulse to move away from the current feeling, or sensation, or perception. The separate self is not an entity, it's an activity. Over time, you can learn to allow this activity to come slowly, effortlessly, naturally to rest in a lovely but disinterested contemplation of the experience. And in this reflection, notice you haven't really pushed or manipulated your experience in any way whatsoever. What you seek, what you long for, lives at the heart of all experience. It can never be found by avoiding experience. If you bring yourself close, if you relax into it gently, deeply, and intimately, you never find a separate self. What you do find is magical. It's eternal. It's infinite. It is more than words can describe. For a from Izumi to finish. A moon at dawn, solitary meets sky. I knew myself completely, no part left out. Thank you for your attention.